Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the All in Skills podcast. This week it is my pleasure to be joined by Joe Frankel. Hello, Joe.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Sunny and bright where you are. Where are you today?
So I'm speaking to you from my home office in Tel Aviv.
Very nice. It must be warmer than here. I know that the Northern Hemisphere is having a bit of a hectic summer. How is it in Israel?
But blazing hot in air conditioning.
Tell me, Joe, what is it that you do?
Well, my official title is I lead communications, director of communications at Amdocs. We're a global telecoms company. What I do is I'm really passionate about words. So I'm all about just making sense of things, creating meaning. I think that's kind of a good way to describe what I do.
Did you study something like English literature or something because that was in your blood?
Actually, I studied very modern for the time. I studied public relations studies. It was a BA in PR, which back then was the first year this course was run. It was very hands-on, very vocational. Back in the day, that was very unusual. And I think I picked that direction when I was not sure what to pursue. And my mum said, "You're good at talking. You're like this." So that's how I ended up. And in fact, the first 10 years of my career was in public relations, and it wasn't a big leap over into communications. And in fact, the bulk of my career is leading internal communications. And my role over the last year has broadened more to encompass a more kind of 360 approach to communications. But that is where my most of my experience comes from, is internal communications for employees. And the company I work for, we have like 25,000 plus employees all over the world. So pretty hard to get them all aligned and on the same page.
Did you have any idea what you were getting into when you started a degree in public relations?
I think my journey was more luck than judgment. I think I had an instinctive idea that I like to connect with people. I've always been passionate about words. I was an avid reader as a child, and as a hobby, I write a lot. And I kind of have like a fantasy parallel career that I'll sit and be writing novels all day. So between that, it felt like a very natural progression. But I think in the field of communications in general, when I look back to what I studied, the essence of what I studied, it's very different from today. Long form content and grammar and journalistic style. And, that's pretty much irrelevant today. So I think that it's not so much what I was studying, but more the how to connect people and create meaning. I think that's been that running thread through all I do.
You were studying in the early 90s. So this was, I know that the internet existed, but it wasn't really being used, was it?
Definitely not on my course. We didn't have the internet. I remember the internet coming into existence in my first job when we all got email addresses. And funnily enough, when I think about where I work today, which is at Amdocs, when I first started, I've actually had 2 stints in my job. I left and came back. But when I first started back in 2005, I believe, social media didn't exist. So it's almost, certainly for probably many people listening to this today, that they don't remember a time without social media. So to imagine running a communications department when social media doesn't exist, and I do remember the conversation we had very early in my career where we were talking about the company intranet and if we should allow employees to comment on articles, which today is just, obvious. And, what will they say? What will they reveal? What will they share? Because we hadn't yet become accustomed to this idea of us just speaking in public and everybody having a platform. So I think that, while by the title of what I do has stayed, or the domain of what I do has stayed the same throughout my career, what I do and the essence of what we do is changed a lot over the years.
Do you feel then a lot of the things that you were taught or that you learned about during your time at university, that it's become slightly quaint, or that it actually has given you a foundation that somebody studying a degree in public relations nowadays would not benefit from?
If I think about what stayed with me from my studies, and that was very unusual at the time, and I say I did a vocational degree, not your sort of traditional English literature type of degree, was this a lot of coursework. We had a lot of parallel projects going on at the same time. One of the things which was good for me because I hated exams, we were graded on attendance and participation and teamwork. And that's the kind of thing that has served me well, because I think anybody with a career like mine in communications understands that you are never doing one thing. You are juggling multiple different stakeholders, multiple different projects. That was definitely something that I remember from back in my studies that has stayed with me.
Last question is about your studies, because it is can be quite interesting for people. Did your degree involve time in industry? You were talking about continual assessment and participation.
A big part of what we did was work experience, where we really actually worked doing what hands-on, doing what we studied. And I remember that clearly. It's very, very prominent, and we were graded on that. We were assessed on that. I studied in Leeds in the north of England, and my work experience was at the National Trust, which National Trust is like the Parks Authority, or takes care of all the protected properties and countryside park areas. And it was really, I just remember it was in a beautiful place. I had to get up, had to show up, had to put in the hours and the grind of day-to-day work. I think that's one of the hardest things that students, when they finish their studies, understand. Oh my God, I have to go to work every day, and it's 8 hours. And so I do remember that being a really good learning experience. And I did actual work. Remember writing press releases, writing content. I felt valuable.
It's worth noting as well, the National Trust is an absolutely enormous organization. I mean, we're not talking about something quaint, and this is vast, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So after university, what steps did you take, and how did you decide which steps to take and which order?
Well, I think like many people in their 20s, you don't give too much thought into the decisions you're making. There's a lot of naivety, which is fine. You sort of stumble along, and somehow I found my way. I did some travel. Actually before my degree, and then after I graduated in the mid-90s, I moved to Israel. And actually my first job was working in the news media in Israel, in the foreign press, and I was working for a US cable channel, being paid peanuts, but it was excellent work. I was a production assistant on this cable TV show. It was great work experience, but really peanuts. But every day we had to scan the newspapers to pull out fine stories and leads. And it was actually my boss, the producer, who'd found this ad and said, back in the day, people looked at ads for jobs in the back of newspapers. And he said, probably shouldn't be saying this, but I really think this is a great opportunity for you. And it was the BBDO global ad network was opening up. It had set up a joint partnership with the leading ad agency in Israel, and was looking for qualified English speakers in these fields. And one of them was public relations, for this kind of a bit like an onboarding scheme for new immigrants. And that's how I ended up spending 10 years at BBDO at BBDO and their PR division. And that was really my immersion into, well, not only into kind of Israeli culture, society in my mid-20s, Tel Aviv, top ad agency. It was like very exciting and fun, but also really establishing my career. I spent a lot of time, at the time there was many global organizations looking to get into the Israeli market, and that was very much my niche. Also, it was a different time in Israel, and there was a peace process, and there was a lot of hope. And so I did a lot of initiatives around a kind of tourism and promoting Israel, and some really massive initiatives around that. So I had some really exciting projects there. And like I said, it really established my skill set and my direction. I think what moved me along, well, I got married, I had children. And I think that after 10 years there, after my third child was born, I took an extended leave and decided to go freelance. And I did some media training and presentation skills and writing and so on. And one of the things that had really exhausted me from working in PR was working with journalists, that kind of the hustle. I loved the strategic thinking, planning, writing side of things. I did enjoy the like I said, the hustling with journalists. It's not so much like that today, because obviously the whole landscape has changed.
Your time at BBDO was, I'm thinking, pre-social media still. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mid-90s to the mid-2000s.
So explain then how you used to make those connections with the press. And
it was really who you knew. You had lists of names, and that's, you had to get on the phone, and you had to build those relationships, and prove your value, and write really, really well, because you had to write excellent press releases, because that would be your way in. I don't want to make judgments, but there were many journalists who weren't looking to work very hard. So if you had an excellent press release that was written really, really well, you'd done the bulk of the work for them. So that's how you got in. And so it was a lot of hustle. It was a lot of chasing them, beepers, getting them on the phone and hounding them and pushing. I can tell a little anecdote, actually, because it's something that really stands out for me. Was we did crisis management for Tenuva, which is the big dairy company in Israel, and there'd been a huge scandal that silicon had been found in their milk, which is extremely dangerous. Anyway, we did this crazy idea, and this is what was so fun about working in advertising in the 90s, that people did crazy stuff. And basically, we had this very, very serious role of how do we fix this crisis? How do we restore faith in like the most valued, loved, historically, this is your children drink their milk type of how do we restore trust in this company? And we ended up sending Tanuva milk to space because in order to say, and this is true, it was actually done. It was on the Russian space station. I can't remember the year. I believe it was 96, 97. We managed to get in touch with them and get a load of milk, Tanuva milk, sent to space. And in order for milk to be sent to space, it has to go through really stringent testing to prove that none of these, silicate, et cetera, exists in the milk. By example, it was clear that the milk was safe, and we ended up filming, the Russian astronauts drinking our milk in space. And this was a moment for me because I wrote the press release, and it ended up on the cover of the New York Times. And in fact, it ended up being picked up global networks all over the world. The Russian astronauts drinking milk, and it was just beautiful visuals, and that was a moment that I remember that words really, really count. And, there was a couple of the lines that I'd written in the press release just got picked up all over the world. And that doesn't happen like this today. It was old school. You waited to get on the cover. You waited to get on the news items because it was pre-social media, but it was definitely the value of really good words.
You've moved to a new country. I'm assuming like a good, diligent student, you studied hard and improved your Hebrew. Were you doing all of this linguistic jiggery-pokery in English or in Hebrew?
Yeah, all in English. And to this day, I speak Hebrew fluently, but I have learnt, can conduct meetings, I can write emails, I can fight, I can do it. I can really communicate in Hebrew, but big caveat, it will never replace, the depth and quality of my English language. And I will die on that hill for anyone. You have to own that. And I owned that a long time ago. I don't pretend I can do anything close to what I do in English and Hebrew. And I think that over the years where I've worked with writers, I've worked with translators, I've been very, very clear that, you have to work in your native language. And when it comes to translation, back in the day, again, when we used to pick up translators, you should only translate into your native language. I've met very, very few people who can really master that skill in two languages.
And the other question is related to, well, I appreciate now you've lived most of your life in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find, though, that culturally there are certain things which still jar or maybe early in your time were very jarring and took you some time to come to grips with?
Are we talking professionally or in general?
Professionally. No, professionally. Let's keep it
in general. I can talk about lots of things. Look, professionally, again, because I don't really have a point of reference, because I finished university and I moved to Israel. So it's not like I had a career in the UK and I can compare like with like. So it's hard for me to say. I've never built a career anywhere else. I think one of the things, actually, when you say jarring, and actually one of the things I really appreciate working in this culture is the directness and the frankness. And people mean what they say, for good and for bad, but it's much easier to get things done, and it's much easier to know where you stand when you're not trying to read the room and what did they mean when they said that. Trying to interpret. You don't need to interpret, So that I really appreciate. I also really, because I probably, as an extension of that, I find even in a hierarchical organization, like a big corporate, like where I work, there is very much a feeling of you can say what you mean. It doesn't matter what level you're at. And I know that in different cultures, that's not necessarily the case. You won't necessarily even be allowed into those rooms. And that's not the case where I work. If you're an expert in your domain, no matter what level you are, you'll be listened to and heard. You might not be agreed with, but you have a seat at the table. So that's very much, I think, part of this culture. And also just shit gets done. It's a culture that moves like this. I think that comes a lot from the military back in the army. There's a book called The Startup Nation where we know how to move things forward. Yes, Israelis can seem impatient and want things to move quickly, but that also really helps in work as well. People don't kind of like mid around.
You brought up Startup Nation. I was going to actually raise it in a minute, but you've done it already. You were there. You were there for this moment, right?
Yeah, funnily enough, if I remember back then, the tech world still wasn't on my radar. During that time, I was working, it's very much an extension of the type of work I was doing in Gitan BBDO, the BBDO ad agency that I worked. And what happened was through various contacts, Amdocs approached me. They were looking for a writer for their very small internal comms team, which back then was, a handful of people. And I joined as doing freelance work, but very quickly I kind of got pulled in. The work grew, and I understood that I didn't have time for anything else other than working for Amdocs, and I eventually turned into an employee. But I've definitely seen the kind of the reinvention and the evolution of the tech industry through the kind of the viewfinder of where I am, which is working in Amdocs, pretty apart from a gap of a year where I left and came back, but basically for the last 19 years, 20 years.
Being one of the biggest, if not the biggest, right?
I'm not sure about the biggest, but we've been around for over 40 years, and definitely the company, this is very much, Israeli culture. It knows how to reinvent itself. It started in Yellow Pages and invoice data. Like in the communications/telecommunications industry, just transforms itself every few years. Once you could make money out of voice, no longer. Then you can make money out of data, no longer. And it's always managed to reinvent itself and move to the next thing, which is actually, by the way, with the agentic era, that's exactly where we are now in the organization as well. How are we transforming ourselves to be something different? And that's really interesting from a storytelling point of view, because the stories we tell, the narrative we tell, changes all the time, and that's my passion.
You mentioned early on 25,000 employees around the world. Is that around the world? Yes.
Yeah.
What percentage are in Israel, and what percentage is
so about
out?
half the company are in India, I would say, and then probably divided up. The next after that is Israel, then US, but US in various locations, and then Europe, APAC.
Okay, so can you explain a little bit then about how your role has evolved within this vast dynamic organization?
I'll try and make this relevant for the communications in general, if people working in communications in general, because I think this is the key. I think that in the past, and this is how often we worked with stakeholders in the past, it was like, I need you to write an email. I need you to write a script. I need you to put together a deck for the town hall. And it was very much a service that we provided to the organization. And over the last few years, and this is how I've really taken my team, and I've pegged this from housework to high value work. We're not a service desk to serve the organization. And that was a transformation that was hard for our ecosystem and for the team to take. Why? Because until that point, our stakeholders were delighted with us because we gave them what they asked for. They asked for a service and we delivered the service. And when we moved to this idea of we deliver high value work, we understand not every task that you are presented is the right thing to do. Is it best for the business? What does the audience need? Why now? What does it mean? All of those questions I was forcing the team. You need to go out there and ask those questions. We need to start understanding the business deeply. If it's not serving the business, it's just noise. So I think when I started our conversation, I talked about making sense of things, being the meaning maker. This is what I mean in a complex organization like Amdocs, where you've got employees all over the world, many, many different leaders. You can't get a whole bunch of employees into one room and tell them a bunch of messages. How do you make sense and meaning for everything you're doing? So if you're being pulled and pushed in different directions by different stakeholders, it's just noise. So how do you build this cohesive story and create clarity and meaning? So much more selective about what we do, why we do it, understanding the business deeply, and add on to that AI, which has obviously catapulted us in the last couple of years. We can no longer be measured on creating content. Creating content isn't a valuable commodity any longer. Everybody creates content and it's cheap and it's quick. The ability to be able to understand the business needs, connect the dots, bundle messages, create overarching narratives, deeply understand the audience needs, listen to your audiences. All of those things are where we need to stand out as communicators. And I don't think it matters if that's internal communications or any kinds of communications. In internal communications, it's tricky in an organization because unlike, ads where advertising or pure marketing where you've got beautiful campaigns, it's very clear where your expertise has gone. When it comes to something like employee communications, a lot of the value that we bring is invisible. It's not even seen. It's the conversations that go on behind doors. It's making sure that a message doesn't go out even. So it's literally, that could be the value of our work, ensuring this is a mistimed message. It's going to confuse employees. It's not going to be received well. Let's shelve it. And that's the type of high value work that we need to be doing. But like I said, it's not always seen. And that's where it's hard to kind of really measure our value inside an organization, because it's pretty much happening behind closed doors often.
And how is the work that you do driven? You work with a team, you run a team, you're curious sometimes about the hierarchy of how these things work.
Look, there's no one model. Every organization is very different. And, you'll find people arguing endlessly about where internal communications departments should sit inside organizations, because there isn't a perfect fit. And I'll start with internal communications because that's where I started, and then I'll go into the broader communications team. So the internal comms team used to sit in HR. A few years ago, it moved over to marketing, and it's always kind of been that hub between marketing and HR. So in the past, we used a dotted line into marketing. Now we're part of marketing, and one of my managers sits on HR management, so we're dotted line into HR as well. We're part of the corporate marketing organization, which reports into the CMO. The transformation that we did last year was in corporate marketing. You had the internal comms team, you had the social media team, and you had the PR team. And we're all kind of, working alongside each other and collaborating where we need to collaborate. But there was never any structure put in place. And what we were essentially finding is that you could look on our social media channels and you could look on our internal comms channels, and we're like telling completely different stories. They look like different organizations. So how do we make sure that we are telling the same story? And also, you have to remember, an employee isn't one thing. Employee isn't that way. So when you call it internal communications, it's really misleading, because you get up in the morning and you're looking at your LinkedIn feed, and you're going into Instagram, and you're going on the train and you're looking at ads around you, and you're coming into the office and you're opening up. So how do we decided to kind of basically turn it on its head and say, let's not lead with our channels. In the past, social media had social channels and internal comms had its channels. Let's lead with the audience. This is the audience we want to reach. This is the message we need to get to them. What's the best way to get that message to that audience? Let's not talk about internal social PR, because then you're looking at a 360 approach. Then, we want to make sure that employees, when they look around, they're seeing a cohesive story. And sure, the formats will change and the messaging emphasis will change, language style will change. But essentially, we wanted to kind of lead with a story and not with the channels. And there's another part of that I think is important for people who are building their careers. And this is what I really want to emphasize. Today, you can't just be one thing. You can't just be an internal communicator. You can't just be a social media expert. You really have to broaden your skill set. You have to be much more flexible and much more agile, because I'll go back to what I said a moment ago. Your value isn't in churning out social media posts, and your value isn't in writing press releases. All of that can be automated. And if you know how to use AI well, you can do that really well. Your value is in creating meaning, in connecting the dots, into understanding the business. You have to be much more broad and flexible and agile. And that's something we're trying to build on our team as well, to create a more blend. Like you'll be stretched and pulled into and working in kind of these different domains. And I think that's really important message for anyone building their career today, because if your special skill is in writing social media posts, you will quickly become extinct. I mean, I say that with love, but that's the truth.
With love. How much of the work that you do is handled by head office? All of it, or is some of it portioned out to the
amazing things about my job? And it's not the same for everybody who works in communications, is that we sit in the headquarters. I work closely with the CEO. I work closely with executive management, and everything we do is guided by the business strategy. Now, that isn't true for every organization, and I will argue that is the role of communications, is to drive business needs. And if what you're doing isn't helping the business, then it's just noise and fluff. Now, when I say helping the business, it can be, how do we help employees feel better about the place they work at? That's going to be good for the business. If you've got employees showing up every day and they don't feel confused, and they know they have confidence in the company, and they understand how what they do rolls up to the bigger picture and vision and direction of the organization, that's going to make you do better work. So when I say it's got to be business focused, I don't mean that has to be cold or ignore the needs of your audiences. On the contrary. But we aren't communicating for the sake of communicating. Everything we do has a business filter on it, and as it should. We are an organization that turns profit, and that's our That's how should be our function in the organization. But I can say that because we work closely with the business and I'm privy to those conversations and I understand deeply where the business is going. If to be a successful communications expert in a large organization, that's where you should be. If your organization isn't structured like that for whatever reason, and often it isn't, you're sitting in HR and there's various levels before you get to, the CEO office, find the people who can get you that information, find your allies, find your way in, build relationships.
Do you hire people? Is that part of your role?
Yeah, very much so.
And how do you find that?
From what perspective?
Well, some people that I've spoken to on the podcast have sometimes found, for example, the hiring side something that they could get on board with, but never quite liked the firing side. The experience, I suppose, of identifying the right candidates and knowing which questions to ask them. People listening to this podcast, some of the younger end of the career spectrum,
could have a whole conversation just about this because now I've started to think about it. I hadn't given it a thought that's why I asked the question, what do you mean? I've done it for so many years and I've interviewed so many candidates and I've read so many CVs. I could probably really just do the masterclass just on this. I can look at a CV and I can straight away get a sense of this person is what I'm looking for. And I can't even put my finger on it. I'm going to be hated for saying this, but if there's a typo in your press release, you're done. Okay, I'm not going to be forgiving about that. That tells me more than you missed a typo. It tells me how much you care or how much attention you give to work. That's just one example, but there's lots about how you position yourself, where your order of your information, how you present yourself. I have interviewed candidates who've told me such interesting things about themselves that weren't on their press release, and they weren't because they thought they weren't very appropriate or sent to this particular task, but it showed me so much about who they are. I'm looking for those rounded people. Their press release was so two-dimensional, but in the interview, I was seeing so much more color and flavor to this person that I literally said, you need to rewrite your press release. Why isn't this on your press release? And it could be things like, I ran an NGO, or I used to do theater workshops for kids after school. And yes, it might not sound super professional, but that tells me that you are an entrepreneur. It tells me that you know how to get stuff done. It tells me that you aren't afraid to build things from scratch. Lots and lots of things. So I think in my world, I'm always looking for candidates that are more than. So if you've got your very traditional, I studied a degree in something related to communications and I had job X, Y, Z, and all of them are very obvious career paths, that isn't going to be interesting to me. My most successful candidates are the people who have done interesting things beyond their role, because I think that building that resilience, that ability to connect the dots, the ability to not to be afraid to walk into rooms. We are constantly having to deal with people who are much more senior than us, who probably know more than we do. And we're having to, prove our worth and our value constantly in conversations that generally people who have had very linear career paths are not the people that are interesting to me. And I can tell you a whole other bunch of stuff as well, interviews as well. I have a very sharp radar about how people conduct themselves in interviews. And I'll just give one tip for anyone listening to this who's starting out their career. Come to that room interested in this organization. Show me that you want to work at this organization. Not that you want to work in this field, but this organization, and do your homework. And when you're asked if you have any questions, ask interesting questions. Ask questions that show that you're curious about the business, not curious about the role, that you're curious about the business. So that's just some thoughts.
Does AI play any role in recruitment, do you think? Or is it something that humans really need to take a hold of? You've mentioned you've kind of got superpowers, like some kind of mentalist.
AI plays a role in everything, okay? I think that's a given. Name any field, any function, and AI has a role. And that's not a bad thing. It's fine. But it's not AI alone. And that, again, I'll say this for everything. It's AI with human, capability. I think that we need to, I don't think we should be debating whether it's right or wrong. I think we should assume at big organizations when your resume will probably go through some kind of agent before it reaches a human. It's looking for keywords. It's looking for, I don't know, this is not my area of expertise, recruitment, but that's generally what's happening. And any candidate today should understand that side of the tech to make sure that their CV is optimized for that type of process.
So let me ask you a quick fire couple of questions, because these are things that we've heard over the past few months on this podcast, that recruiters don't look below the top third of a CV. Is that true, or is that maybe a little misleading?
There's been CVs I haven't bothered to look past the top half. Just they're just boring. Like in communications, I think this is very key, because if it's a rule of communications. If you haven't sucked me in the first couple of lines, you've lost me. If you're not able to do that on your CV, then that tells me what your skills as a communicator. So yeah, I might be sounding harsh, particularly in the communications profession. I think that's fair game. If you have lost my interest in the first first half of the resume, then you're probably not the right person.
And is the recruitment process something you actually enjoy?
Look, I think I'll break it down. Do I enjoy it in the sense that it takes up a huge amount of my time, and yes, and it can be really, like I said, time consuming? Yes, so. On the macro sense, yes, I enjoy it in the sense of building teams. Big part of what I do is I love mentoring. I love my greatest joy is seeing people grow in the team and grow and leave and go on to bigger and better things. And that's something that I feel very proud of. What we do is so much in the people skills and building relationships. Finding the right people on the team is essential in leadership. So yes, I do enjoy building the team in the broader sense.
How important do you think it is that somebody enjoy or actually love what they do for a living?
It's everything. I think that question is couldn't imagine in a way. I mean, I think it's a privilege. I appreciate that that's probably a very privileged answer. I understand that some people are not lucky enough to love what they do. They have to work out of necessity. Yes, I appreciate that. If you're able to enjoy your job and feel fulfillment from what you do, I think that's a blessing, and I think it's something we should all strive to. I won't lie, I would say a big part of my job I find absolutely gruesome, and like any job, I think we're naive to think that everything we do is going to be unicorns and roses. It's not. I feel lucky that the essence of what I do is something I'm really passionate about. When it comes to the creativity and the thinking side of things, I love that. Yes, certainly in my position, I spend a lot of time on organizational politics. How do I get things moving inside the organization? How do I make sure that, we get approvals? All of that can be extremely exhausting. But on the broader sense, I'm very passionate about what I do. And I think that if you can find that, even if it's not even 100% of what you do, but a good chunk of what you do, then you're in a good place.
Joe, I feel that we could talk for a long, long time together, but I'm very aware of the time. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed it.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.